right, Umang, we're going to get you on Spotlight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure to speak with so many people across the world, share and learn perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Umang, first question. You ready?
Yes, let's go.
Okay, so as a leader who has climbed the ranks to CEO, how do you define inclusive leadership and why is it critical in today's business environment?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, look, if you don't have inclusive leadership, you're not living in the world today, right? The world today is so diverse that you must have inclusive leadership. And the way we look at it is, I'm a great believer, Emma, in the ability to go back to purpose. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of the organization that I'm tasked, to run today is about caring for life. Mm-hmm. And when you draw inspiration from your purpose, no matter what you're doing in terms of projects, what you're doing in terms of, the immediate deliverables, caring for life comes to everyone. It is agnostic to gender. It is agnostic to your capability. It's agnostic to everything. So I think, and let's look around us, right? Who are the people who bring us into this world? Our mothers, right? Who are the people who help us thrive and get to where our parents do, right? And so caring for life is a little bit of a feeling. It's an emotion that if you care for life, please do feel belonging and inclusion into an environment. So I think what's most important is we begin to look at our metrics in terms of our numbers, and those are important too, don't get me wrong. But I think when each one of us steps back and says, what am I really here to do in this organization? And you begin to look at your purpose, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, this purpose can be served by everyone. So there is absolutely no, there's no boundary about who can be included and cannot be included. So for me as a CEO, very important to have a diverse viewpoint. Very important to co-opt everyone, right? It doesn't matter who you are, but you're caring for life, right? And that's what our purpose is. And so therefore, if you link back with the purpose of your organization, extremely important. Inclusion is very important to empathy. Empathy is very important to innovation. And innovation is extremely important to progress, right? So for me as a CEO, extremely important. Sadly, we don't do enough and more to include people because at times we get lost in trying to determine what project is versus what the purpose of the organization is. Mm.
So that's your North Star, is that kind of staying with the core purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if we all just link with the North Star of the organization, if we all just say, okay, what does my organization want me to do? Forget about my yearly numbers, my budgets, my goals. My organization wants to care for patients, right? And who is a patient? A patient is somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's, sister, brother, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm equal in terms of my capability to serve this as anyone else. Mm-hmm. Right. And for a leader, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter who, you could have more experience with people, but everyone wants to serve the purpose of caring for life.
Yeah.
And I just think that's very important. Just keep your North Star for the organizations that you work for at the top of your mind and say, this is what we were intended to do. And therefore, we should be included, and therefore leaders must include, their teams appropriately.
Right, we're going to move on. Thank you. Now we're also covering the power of sponsorship as part of this think tank, and actually it's something that we're covering for the whole of March. So we'd love to hear a personal story where sponsorship has played a key role in your career and your development, and how that has influenced your approach to leadership at Cipla.
No, it's amazing. It's great that you asked me this because, interestingly, I was on a recent trip to India and I touched base with my sponsor, a person who was sponsoring my growth a couple of years back, and I'll mention that. I'll mention her name. So Kalpana Morparia actually is a director on the board of Philip Morris International, and Kalpana Morparia was on the board of my last organization. And Kalpana was, was a mentor, sponsor, both. And I'll make a small distinction between the two, but I think the two really coexist. They're sides of the same coin. And Kalpana was, she ran JP Morgan in India, and she's a well-renowned world leader. And Kalpana played a large role, a long and large role in shaping who I became as an individual, right? And there were aspects about her sponsorship, where she was diametrically quite different from me in the way that we would present ourselves as individuals, right? And I think I just valued deeply. In fact, one of the things that I've mentioned is when you find a sponsor or a mentor, look actually for skills that the sponsor or mentor have, which are diametrically opposite at times to yours, because you don't get stuck in the same way of thinking, right? So Kalpana really helped me, and I think the role that she played was an advocate for what I bring to the table. She was a tactician for how I would present, where I would go, right? So she was a more here and now of, okay, fair enough, this is your goal over 5 years, which is good. Your mentor will help you get there. That's great, right? But what's the here and now? What's the action orientation on where you need to be, on where you need to be heard, on what type of roles you could do, what type of experiences you could build, right? So so I see the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. They're both sides of the same coin. Mentorship is a little bit more of the strategic planning aspect of your career, right? And it's a more longer term. Whereas sponsorship is like, okay, here's the action. It's more tactic, right? It's about your advocacy. It's about your voice and where it's going to be heard. And I think you need both. And many times one individual functions as both, right? But I think, a big shout out to Kalpana Morparia. She really helped me progress in my journey. Hats off to her and what she's been able to achieve in her career as well. So that's a live example. Personally, I know you told me, Emma, don't take any answer more than 2 minutes, but I'm going to digress from that and maybe just move out a little bit from the 2-minute time zone. I think personally, both sponsorship as well as mentorship are a part of what I call allyship, right? Both of them have to function together for you to really come out as an individual, right? And so I would go out and say, okay, you have a great mentor. The mentor is a more longer term sort of a person, but have someone who's advocating for you on a weekly, monthly basis and making your voice heard and your capabilities seen.
Thank you. And can I just say, I love the fact that you've given a shout out to your sponsor. I think that's incredible. So, highlighting what she has done for you as a sponsor, and that diversity of perspectives and ways of thinking, I think is hugely helpful. And it's obviously, it's paid off. So I think it's great also that you've acknowledged her and vocalized who she is. So thank you, Umang. And this is a conversation, so we don't have to continually stick to script. But I think the next question I'd like to cover is, so in your journey to becoming a global CEO, you've said about how you've worked with your sponsor, but how is it implemented in Cipla to uplift others, particularly those from underrepresented groups?
Yeah, and I think it's a topic that we've been spending a lot of time. If you were to just imagine Cipla in a country like India. India is very diverse, right? We speak so many languages, we have so many cultures and so many religions in India, and we have 1.5 billion people in India. So inclusion in India is also as much as a topic, as much as we are a global company and we're trying to include people from different parts of the globe. India itself presents a challenge, which is quite remarkable. And I think some parts of India, due to cultural reasons, due to reasons of how we function as a society, women are underrepresented in our workplace. The LGBTQ community is also to some extent, not known as the LGBTQ community because people are worried about coming out in person. And so there are very diverse groups. I think the challenge we had as a leader is how do we bring this all out? And within Cipla, I think it's remarkable that our teams have made considerable progress in this. We've, the first thing you start with is a diversity and inclusion council, right? And then and then reality hits you, and the reality can be as small as things like, okay, we want to increase diversity. 10,000 of our people are in the field in India, but in the field you traveled. India is a little different in terms of development index right now compared to some of the other countries. But we expect our field to travel and meet doctors and meet the healthcare professionals the whole day. So their day starts at 9 and it sometimes ends at 7. Sometimes doctors give appointments a little later in the day, depending on their surgeries, right? At this point in time, one of the challenges that you can come across is women saying, we really have no restrooms to use, right, through the day, because we expected to travel so much, and men can go anywhere, right? But for women, it's a little bit of an issue. So when you begin to pick issues like this, or the fact that, and this happened during COVID, and it's quite remarkable, that when we had women leaving their houses to come and work in our factories because the factories had to run to make medicines, we found certain communities saying, no, you're supposed to look after the house and the children, and everyone's there, right? And you can't be going to work. And some women made that call to say that, no, we are going to go to work because this is not just about the family, but it's about the world that needs to survive. So I think it's about helping them get back to their houses on time. It's about making sure they have security in the night when the buses fly back. So we've put in a lot of policies, and we've got flexi working hours today. We're perhaps one of the few companies in India that do that. We've got healthcare. We've got benefits for creche and childcare. We've got flexi field working for the ladies on the field. And now we've gone to a point which I'm most excited about. My challenge to our manufacturing teams was, when do I see a line that's completely run by ladies? And now we've got that coming in place. So this is for the gender, right? Gender side of diversity and inclusion. We're also doing a lot on LGBTQ, and that community is a little bit more silent in India than it is elsewhere in the world because of cultural reasons. But we're trying to support that. We've got a separate type of an insurance that we are doing for them. So it's small things. And what you begin to realize, Emma, is that you have to do small things to contribute to a larger purpose, especially when many people either don't think the same way or are in a process where they're changing their thinking about diversity and inclusion. So you start small, but begin to add up to a lot of things that finally make a difference. Right? So a lot going on in Cipla. And then globally, we have a different story. Our teams in South Africa, it's remarkable. So where diversity is an issue today in India in the field, in South Africa, it's the opposite. We've got actually a larger share of our teams, or a very large share of our teams, which are in the field, who are actually women. Right? So it's so cultural about how some of these issues are different. And yet, you're the same company operating in multiple places, and you're looking at the diversity index in South Africa, and you're wondering why India is not performing well. And then the US has its own diversity index. So I think part of this is cultural. The cultural ones are more difficult to deal with because they take the form of trying to change a thinking and a mindset with a set of people. But I think we're well underway with that journey, and a big shout out to all the teams in Cipla, especially our HR team. A lot of progress and work.
Fantastic. So thank you for drawing on the kind of differences, the challenges that you face, obviously, as a global organization with those cultural differences. And I think just to applaud the approach that you're taking where there are bigger shifts is those grassroots, everything from grassroots, incremental changes, but then also leading from the top. So you're coming at it from both both sides, aren't you? That's fantastic. I'm going to kind of switch mode now. So I'd love to know what actionable steps individuals can take to find a sponsor and how they should best cultivate those relationships.
It's a great question. Let me put it the other way around, right? I think the general individual psyche is to wait, at least in parts of our organization, parts of some of our countries, is to start feeling as though somebody needs to help me, right? And then the people have to go out finding stuff to do. I'll be provocative and just say, what are you doing so that a sponsor finds you? Right? Everyone, all of us work in organizations. All of us know who are the more influential people who can be great sponsors, right? These are people either who have very different skill sets, have the ability to be heard at the right times, have influence, right? And it's not difficult to spot influence in a corporate setting, right? It's actually one of the first things that people pick up. Who's influential because of either their thought leadership or because of the way they're connected in the organization, or frankly, even externally on a network, right? Go onto LinkedIn, see who's connected to who, etc. But my question is, you might know these sponsors. Why should these sponsors work with you? What are you doing to be found by these sponsors, right? And I think I'd like to put the debate the other way, right? And my whole point is, if you make a list of 3 or 4 people that you believe are great sponsors, make sure that they find you rather than you find them. Remember, a sponsor is equally interested. That's why they're called sponsors, right? They're equally interested in finding the next versions of people who really do well, right? Their whole objective is to connect the world, connect the organizations, and increase their network and increase their zone of influence, right? So are you a person who a sponsor is going to naturally find? Is the question that I would raise. And there are ways to go about it. I think obviously you could make a list, take a look at people who have diverse views, take a look at people who are well connected outside, take a look at people who at a table have a voice larger than the others. Not difficult to find, right? Take a look at people who are typically can evangelize new ideas, right? Those are the type of people who are great sponsors, because people who have new ideas have a way of presenting ideas and articulating them so that so that the others can listen. Sorry. And so I think that's the whole play here. So find your sponsor, or let me put it this way: identify your sponsor, but then go the extra mile to make sure that the same sponsor finds you. So stand out, right? Don't wait for a diversity policy of a company to find you a sponsor. Don't go out tomorrow and to the organization HR and begin to say, you know what, I think we must have sponsors and I'd like you to find me a sponsor. No, I think you've got to be noticed equally. So pick up stuff. So what do? You pick up things that you think might interest the sponsor. And you pick up things that you think are important for your organization. Attend external events, if just in case your sponsor is not one from the company. Attend external events where you begin to see that sponsor 2 or 3 times a year, right? And begin to contribute to their feed on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms. But that's how you go about making sure that your sponsor finds you as much as you find your sponsor. And I think it's a very, very important thing to get both of these working together.
Absolutely. It's a 2-way relationship. I agree. And we talk a lot about owning your career trajectory, taking control. Yes, you should have the support of your organization, your HR team, your line manager, but you need to be found, as you say. So I think that's really powerful. Thank you so much. And I think I've seen some comments come in the chat, which we'll take a look at later, I think in support of that. So, okay, next question. So we touched on this already, but I'd love to dig into it in a bit more detail. So how are you ensuring that the values of inclusive leadership and sponsorship are embedded within Cipla to ensure that diversity and inclusion are not just buzzwords, but lived experiences?
So it's all work in progress, and I can't claim that we've fully been able to do it. I think in humble submission, it's something that we're trying as much as possible to further. Just a couple of things, as I mentioned. We've got an active council, but that's just the way we start off. The other things are, more, as I mentioned, you've got to change your thinking. So we've got these unconscious bias workshops going on. We've got, and sometimes I'd like to believe it starts with us as leaders and with me personally. And I used to have a habit till about a few years back where if I had to recruit someone, I would say, oh, let's go and find a person like this. And then I would break out into, he can do this, right? And now this is an unconscious bias, right? You don't will for it to do it. But now what happens is, and I've noticed that in conversations that I have, I would say, okay, let's find this person, and then immediately there's a thing in the head saying, oh, it could be a she, he or she, right, could do this. So I think the first thing is when you begin to change this thinking, you've got to talk to an audience. So you've got to talk about an audience that is plural, not singular, right? And that plurality, plurality or whatever. I'm sorry, guys, not getting it right. Is extremely important for us to move forward as a society and as an organization, right? The second is, obviously each leader has a target to go after in diversity. But, I've realized that these targets are beyond a point, you could have a 10-year view on a 10% diversity index moving to 20. Is that good? I don't know. I'm not sure, right? But here's what happened to me today, right? To me 3 days back when I flew into the US. So I was flying on this airline, and you would never imagine this, Emma. I was flying on this airline called Air India. On a direct flight from India to the US, and the flight landed, and the pilot comes on and he says, well, this is one of the smoothest landings that I've been part of, and all of us were like, oh, this guy's praising, blowing his own trumpet, and he says no, and I'm just saying this because the three other pilots and this is a 16-hour flight, right? So there are two pilots who are, two pairs of pilots who actually fly the plane. And he said the other three people in the cockpit are ladies. And I'm just so thankful that I've flown with them. This landing was one of the smoothest I've seen, and it was by this particular pilot. And we pride ourselves in being an airline that has the highest number of lady pilots. Right? Now, it's the same. Now, how does that land on me? It's the same India setting. Right, from where we are struggling to have our diversity score improve, and by the way, right, it's an airline that's doing it. So why can't other organizations do it? So I'm not a great believer. I think it's good to track these diversity indexes, but that should not be the motive because of which you need to improve the diversity of your team. The diversity of your team has to begin with your thought of having people who are equally capable, of having people who you think can contribute, right? And I think that we need to change the language around how we approach this. So that's the second thing, the unconscious bias, changing that, trying to look at more examples. Now, this Air India example is a great example that I'm going to use within the organization, right? Using those examples to further, if you were to, and the third thing, which is very interesting, is I see, and I've gone out on one of your earlier chats with Recall and said this. A lot of people come to me saying, you think we're as capable as men to run the manufacturing line, right? And I'm like, no, it's not a question of are you as capable as men. I think you're equally capable and more. So don't have that self-doubt about what you can do. Right? Here I'm flying an airline where the entire airline is a flight crew, is a pilots who are ladies, and I think they fly it better. In all honesty, as the man in the captain's seat says, right, than anyone else. They don't have self-doubt when they're flying this airline for you, and I'm hoping they better not have self-doubt if I'm on that aircraft and they're flying it. And so my third thing would be to everyone out there, right? don't have any self-doubts about, whether you can do it as well as anyone else. You can do it better, right? And it's when both sides happen. When I change as a leader, my bias, and when you change as a person who's trying to be included and do better things, your self-doubt, the two of those come together remarkably well in helping us build a more inclusive place. So I think those are the couple of things that I think we're doing in trying to push our agenda further.
Fantastic. I'm conscious of time. I'm gonna combine the next two questions.
Okay.
So again, you touched on this, why diversity is important, driving innovation, advancements, culture, business growth. I guess, are there any more kind of examples that you could share where you've seen that demonstrated, what the outcomes have been from having a diverse workforce, from having a more inclusive culture?
So first of all, I think if you have a diverse workforce, let me underscore this. None of your metrics in terms of your ability to operate or in terms of your ability to deliver go down, right? So everyone has to firstly believe that. So let me just tell you about Cipla. Cipla's got the head of technical manufacturing, which is the 47 plants we run across our world. The supply chain function is all led by Geena Malhotra. Right? She runs all of this organization, which historically has, for Cipla, always been an organization and a machinery that's been run by men, right? But Geena's doing that job. We've got the head of HR. We used to have the head of, a few years back, the head of innovation, who's, again, Geena came from there and moved into manufacturing. So we've got a lot of people. Our head of IT is Sneha, right? So head of corporate comm. So we have a lot of these head positions, which are important to signal to the organization. But, it's not about signal. These people made it there because of their own capability, right? And ever since they've been there, I've seen the organization actually exceed a lot of its metrics. Not, everyone thinks, women can't do this, women can't do that. We've actually exceeded our metrics. And we've built an organization that is more empathetic. We've built an organization that is listening a lot more. We've built an organization, perhaps where people are rallying to a certain purpose as against just solving a task at hand. And sure, we have our challenges as a company, right? No company is one where there are no challenges. But I think we built an organization that's listening, caring, has more empathy, and yet achieving its metrics. And then I go back to what we started with, Emma, which was the purpose, right? Are we living our purpose on a daily basis? We are here, we were born for the patients, right? Are we doing the best that we can for the patients? And I believe diverse workforces help you do that, because everybody is a patient at a certain point in time, and everybody's servicing a patient at a certain point in time. So that's my view. If you have to solve some of the biggest problems in the world today, innovation included, because that's the fuel for growth, you have to have empathy, and you have to have people who are capable. Our R&D organization actually has a very large share of scientists who are women and who are from other communities, right? And I think it's important to put this together in terms of how we work with each other. So absolutely important. Can't underscore the importance of it.
Fabulous, thank you. And my final question before we open the floor up to questions from the audience is if I could ask you to pick your top piece of advice. So one top thing for everyone on the call, regardless of their role, industry or level, what's that top piece of advice on leveraging the power of sponsorship and practicing inclusive leadership?
I think practicing, I'm sure everyone on this call will practice inclusive leadership, right? I think it's something that comes to you naturally. My top piece of advice may be in two parts. If you're working in an organization, please link back with the purpose of that organization. And if the purpose of that organization is to deeply care for a community or to do something around innovation or anything else, feel as much included as much capable as anybody else, like any other type of colleague that you have. And the second thing is, do not wait for diversity and inclusion policies to come out, right? Go find your sponsor, have the action orientation to further your voice, to further your career, right? Don't wait for a sponsor to find you. You go find your sponsor, and just make the difference that you were born that you were born into this world to do. Emma, I think I can't hear you.
I'm on mute.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I
Really
can hear
got
you.
through without having that happen. So thank you so much, Umang. We're obviously going to hear more from you during the Q&A. And so I'm going to open up to all of you to either raise your hand if you're happy to come on camera and ask the question directly to Umang, please do. Or if you want to paste questions in the chat, and then I can read them out. So over to you. Amanda, thank you so much. Are you okay to come on? Brilliant. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Emma. Hi, Umang. Great to hear about
Emma.
your organization. I loved your description of an organization which is listening. What tools and methods have you implemented, or what messages to leadership so that you can make that statement and employees also know that it is indeed an organization that listens?
Great question. Wonderful question. So here's what we do, Amanda. What we've tried to do, and look, we're learning this as much as anyone else. We haven't mastered it. The first thing I kind of imagine that leadership has a very tall agenda in the world nowadays, and I think part of the way that we can function is to make sure that the movement is a lot more wider than just concentrated with a few leaders. So what we've tried to do is put up these boxes everywhere in our sites. We've got suggestion boxes. People can come drop ideas. They can be about simple things like efficiency. They can be about, policies for gender diversity. They can be about, what they think is important at this point in time for them as people. That's one. Second, we encourage a lot of dialogue. And these dialogues sometimes are performance dialogues that we have at our sites every day in the morning between different teams who sit across, but also areas where people can view and voice, what is actually bothering them. That's the second thing. So these are the Marcy kind of movements, right? Your suggestion boxes, your ability to reach people. We have a buddy concept, right, where people can reach out for, and then you always have the councils, right? So this is what we've done at the broad grassroots level. I think at the top level with the leadership, it's really about conversations about how we want to become a more diverse workforce, how we think that empathy is important, and how listening is important. And to be honest, in the rigmarole of what we do on a day-to-day basis, sometimes this gets lost. Right. So there are some days in the organization where I feel that though we want to be a listening organization, we aren't listening. Though we want to be empathetic, we aren't being empathetic. But my pitch is this, that if in 365 days we can be that listening organization, even for 200 days, I think we've moved the needle significantly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda, so much. I'm just having a look at the chat. We've got Debbie. Are you happy to come on camera to ask your question, or do you want me to read it out? Probably trying to locate you. I'll read it out. So Debbie has said, so lovely to hear you, Umang. Thank you for all that you do. How have your views on diversity evolved over the years?
Yeah, very interesting. So I've actually made the shift myself. As I say, I'm still a very firm believer on capability, and I don't think just because of a diversity score that we should be recruiting people, right? I think it has to be an equal match of capability. And we have to remove our unconscious biases as people as leaders who can function. So at a certain point, I was a complete capability as I was rising through a couple of roles and hierarchies. I was always about being, complete capability driven, right? But then I reached a certain level and I said, oh, maybe there's an unconscious bias because of which the only people we're interviewing are of the same gender, the same type of thinking. And that's when I began to program that capability a little bit more differently to say, how are we more accepting of diverse viewpoints? So at this point in time, my views on diversity completely a match of capability and actually a match of softer skills. So what happens in an organization, and I've seen this many times, you write a job description, but your job description is always about your skills and capabilities. It's never about the emotional aspect. It's never about the soft skills, right? It's just like, okay, should be a team player. What does that mean, right? Everybody's supposed to be a team player. But if you begin to write into that job description, which frankly, to be honest, we aren't doing as yet, but we want to get to there, about skills that you think you want that person to espouse personally, right? I think it makes a lot of difference. So the moment you begin to bring to the fore things like has to be more empathetic, has to be listening more, right? Should be able to galvanize women leaders in the organization, should be able to galvanize different communities, you might actually get a good response between the capability at one side and these softer skills. Historically, we've just done this. And so we get into an approach where you're not looking at people who are bringing the other side of the emotional, the other side of the well-rounding that needs to be there for organizations to be a lot more empathetic and innovative.
I absolutely love that response. Thank you, Umang. So much to sort of unpack there, but I think taking that holistic approach with the job description example, where you're not just focusing on those, I guess, sort of hard skills, and you're looking at the soft skills. I call them power skills.
Absolutely.
And they're often undervalued, is what I would say, but absolutely critical. So yes, I really love what you've shared on that. Okay, please feel free to raise your hands and to continue to put questions in the chat. We've got one from Mark. It's a great question. So how do you deal with your male leaders who, whether unconsciously or not, do not treat women with equality?
It's a great question. I have to admit, Mark, that in today's world, I would have seen that as a very big challenge 5 years back, at least in our organization. But in today's world, I don't see that as much. Yes, there are instances where you could see a flare up time and again, but it's not. And I think part of the reason is that our management council team today, the leadership team, is very diverse geographically. And what I've historically seen is that leaders in North America, leaders in South Africa, leaders in the middle, leaders in the MENA region, North Africa, Europe, right, and the leaders in India. So when you have everyone coming together, it becomes easier for people in the leadership team to learn from each other and how they engage with different people, right? So we've got leaders in South Africa, in the US, engaging very differently, with ladies, with men, with different communities. And I think even if you're a leader who's not had that experience, right, just being able to observe and learn from the way their use of words and how they make people feel more comfortable at the other end is a great learning for the leadership. Team. So I think that's what we do. Just help our leaders learn from each other and from the shared experiences.
And can I just follow up on that, Umang? What happens when you do see something that you don't like as the CEO? Like, what do you actually do in that moment?
So, it's like this. I think, Mark, it's a lot easier from a gender perspective to deal with this. I think I think on the gender perspective, we're very clear that we don't want anything in the organization which is gender not neutral or community not neutral, right? Or for that matter, and I mean community, I mean different tribes, different people, different nationalities, or even the LGBTQ. So that is a non-negotiable. I think what we deal with more, and which is tougher at times to deal with for an organization, is when you see dissonance within certain types of behavior which are not gender in specific. There, the general tendency is, okay, a warning at one time, or a conversation, and you let it go. But on gender, on issues around community, on inclusion, we do not take a lenient view. So I think that's the general advice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to come back to Debbie's questions. Maddie, are you happy to come in the spotlight and ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Umang, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and your advice. And I think there was so much humility to what you were saying, but obviously making the level of change and transformation and the cultural transformation that you've driven in your business must have been incredibly tough, incredibly hard. I was wondering what the kind of single biggest challenge has been as you've kind of gone through that journey, and and did you believe kind of before you went through that you'd be able to achieve the level of change that you have?
I never looked at it, to be very honest, as a journey where it would be incredibly difficult to create a more diverse workforce, right? I didn't have that mindset when I started, to be very honest. But I think the single biggest thing that I would call out is we don't appreciate it as much. Is just to remove this unconscious bias and just to believe that it's so wonderful that you were given the biggest learnings of your life by your mother, right? Your biggest value systems came to you by your mother. There was a network in a community, and of course, the dads are around. I'm there too for my son. But I think the mother plays such a wonderful role, and if we were to respect that and give more power to our daughters and to everyone else, each one of us has kids, right? We want them to do the best. So imagine yourself as an individual first, rather than somebody in a corporate setting. Right? As an individual, would you make a distinction that my mother can't do this, or my sister can't do this? No. You educate. Every family educates today their kids the same way. So why do we behave differently when we go back into corporate settings? Why do we disregard the role that our mothers and our sisters and everybody else has had in our upbringing, right? And I think and many times it's not because you consciously do it, it's just because it's an unconscious bias. You're used to seeing men in office, you're used to seeing people of a certain community, that begins to play with your mind. So I just think that's the one thing that I would say, that remove your biases and begin to appreciate the role that women have played in making you the person that you are today in your personal life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. Okay, we've had a few more questions come in. So back to Debbie. Debbie's asked, do you have any learnings from your own mentoring journey as a mentor or a sponsor?
Yes, I've had several learnings. And the first was a learning, interestingly, where the people that I was trying to mentor, my organization or sponsor, basically did a reality check on me and said, you're a good mentor, you're doing everything well, but frankly, you're not connecting with the Gen Zs, right? And I was like, oh, so now there's another community called the Gen Zs, right, which need inclusion. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? I didn't know how to do it, right? The closest I am to Gen Zs is my communication with my son, right? And so then they said, well, we think you need reverse mentoring. You need to be reverse mentored by some Gen Zs to understand how to function with that group. And this is the first time, quite honestly, Emma, that somebody told me that to engage with a group, as leaders, you believe you can engage with anyone, right? And sometimes that comes with authority, right? And your feeling of invincibleness and things like that. And so I was like, okay, I'm willing to be reverse mentored. And so 2 people actually reverse mentored me for a period of a month on just what Gen Zs are and how you should engage with them. And I thought that was a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Right. And it's quite amazing that, and maybe as a practice, right? If you find people who are having a problem in connecting with a certain team or a certain group of people, just do a reverse mentoring. It actually helps you change a lot of perspective.
Wow. Love that. Thank you. Great question, Debbie. And yes, love that response, Umang. Ilmante, are you happy to ask your question on camera?
Hi, hello everybody. Can you hear me?
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
guys. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. I deeply apologize. I actually joined quite late in the call, so I definitely missed, an important part of it. But what I wanted to check, I mean, from your experience, and I'll be brutally honest and open, with my question, if I may, please,
Please
given
do.
it's hopefully a safe environment, right? Are you observing, in your practice and in your professional experience, have you been observing maybe a little bit that, what we call the target or golden standard leadership profile would be a bit more like male profile skewed? Like what I mean is, for example, what I'm observing in my professional journey as a leader is if a woman, has a bit of more, emotional touch on things, a bit more empathy, basically it's not appreciated. Rather, it's being said, oh, somebody has a low emotional intelligence. Have you been experiencing any of this? Or is it, I'm just wondering whether this is a company specific thing I'm seeing, or this is actually quite common.
No, it's very common. So let me put it out. It's very common, and I think it's step one of your step one, or the earlier step that I mentioned to Emma earlier, right? During my transition, it was the same, right? That everything was capability, everything was role, and therefore someone who didn't fit that profile was somebody who was not, espousing the quality. So I agree with you. All organizations have it. It's not just yours, right? But what I will say is that I think when you begin to look at budgets and you look at targets, this is the general thing that begins to happen, right? But there are lots of examples where you begin to look at purpose, right? And why you were born as a company, and you begin to have that purpose link back with your targets for the year, that you will realize that your diversity and the need for people with different skills comes in. So I agree with that. The other thing that I would just suggest is, just like we found, nothing suffers. Even if you have somebody with more EQ in a job, nothing suffers. Nothing suffers. And I think you've got to make examples out of that in trying to change a particular mindset, right? I think the question you're raising, though, is one of dominant logic. Organizations have got used to having men in roles, and that becomes the dominant logic of those organizations. And I think one way to change that dominant logic is to remove, as I mentioned, the unconscious biases of leaders. And they're not doing it purposely. It's just very unconscious in the way they look at it. And to bring back the role that women have had in making the men and women today that we see in our workplaces.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing your views and your experiences. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mante. I've got one final question before we do our wrap up. So 90% of Fortune 500 companies are run by a male CEO. Everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but our mission at WeQual is 50-50 gender equality in the world's largest organizations. So from your perspective, do you see us achieving that?
Let me step back and say, in some countries, we'll be more than 50-50, right? I mean, I think women will be running more companies in some countries than the others. In some other countries, we might be low. I'm not after a certain goal set, right? And the reason for saying that is maybe because I've got a little bit of the background from India, where we have lesser number of women in the workforce, right? And therefore, if we were to index this to say 50-50, it's actually 70-50 for women, right? So that's why I'm not looking at goal targets. I just think that if it's 5% today, that's just my thought, and I don't want to sound controversial here. If we make that 20%, right, in 5 years, it's a lot of progress, right? And then the 20 after 5 years can become 40. And that's even greater progress, right? So it's not going to happen overnight. And this is a theme that we have to stay patient with over the next 10 years or 15 years. But I think if we just start being more inclusive as people, this will naturally happen.
Thank you, Umang. Any final reflections, takeaways, please do post them in the chat. We'd really appreciate your thoughts. I just want to thank you, Umang, so much for such a thought-provoking and inspiring session. It's been wonderful and a real privilege to interview you. Yes, we really appreciate you coming along today. And to all of you on the call, to our wonderful WeQual members, allies and partners, because there are a few new faces, thank you for joining and for your wonderful questions and contributions. We're going to run a small poll because we love feedback. So if you could take the time before you leave the session to just complete that, that would be brilliant. And we have the whole month dedicated to sponsorship. So please join us for the events that we have coming up later this month. We're going to post the link in the chat as well as a reminder on those sessions. So I'm just going to launch that for everyone. Hopefully you can see that. And Umang, any final reflections from you?
No, I think it's been, thank you firstly for having me here. And thank you for your continued sponsorship of this global movement that we want across the world. But I'm very intrigued with the type of questions, both Emma, that you raised, as well as the questions that the audience raised. And I think more power to all of you. And I hope that, and I hope that we have a more equal world, even if it is 5 years or 10 years later.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I certainly will play my part towards that goal.
As always.
Thank you.
Thank you.